Welcome to the Sunday Superversive Livestream. I am your host, Ben Wheeler, here with Anthony Marchetta. Please ignore the other livestream. That was just YouTube being stupid. I deleted the livestream, but it still came back. Um, I am watching a video about Resident Evil 7, though. I don't know. How are you doing today, Anthony?
I'm having a great day. I have Digibros Asterisk War Sucks compilation on in the background because that's always a good time.
Best content he's made in a long while. And
Which is a little sad.
I know. That's probably something that when we see how this story arc ends up for him, because like he's lost about $1,200 worth of Patreon support, um, ish. Um, we'll see how he goes. But
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Digibro is now Digiknee and is
nay.
claimed Digiknee, I'm sorry, and has claimed he's a transsexual or something. I don't know or care. I never
Right,
really
right.
had any respect for Digibro. He was always a degenerate. I respect him as an analyst, and that hasn't changed because he's still a very, very good analyst. He's even come out with a video since then that was pretty well written.
Yep.
That was on what was it? The
Yeah.
Tokyo Sinks, Japan Sinks. That was it.
Oh yeah, that was a good one.
That was a pretty good video, honestly.
Yep.
So he's still a very good analyst, which is the only thing about him that I ever had any respect for anyway. And he has some integrity as an analyst. I'll give him that too. I think personally, especially
Hmm.
when you compare him to people like Jeff. But everybody comes off well in comparison to Jeff, who is a hilariously slimy pyramid salesman type guy.
Oh yeah.
But
He's
whatever. The point is,
we just need to have a stream about YouTube personalities sometime. Um, and people
maybe.
we follow. Just because, I don't know, it's something to talk about when we're in a drought of animation. Hmm. And today we're going to be
Yeah,
talking about,
unfortunately.
right? Today we'll be talking about Korean animation, as well as, well, not animation, excuse me, Korean manga, which is referred to as manhwa. Um, and its general increase in quality over the years and how it changes. The first probably the first Korean manhwa I got in touch with was one called Immortal Regis. It was your typical story. A boy simps so hard for a witch, he dies, and she brings him back to life because not even death stops an OnlyFans subscription. Uh, um, things happen. There's a whole bunch of what I'm going to refer to as mystical horse hockey, uh, as well as veiled metaphors that don't actually mean anything. And there's a time skip into the next series, Cavalier of the Abyss. I wish I was joking. There isn't actually an ending to Immortal Regis. There's just a huge cliffhanger, and then it's time skips hard. The main character has this like he's got his little brother sick, and like if he returns to the human realm he'll kill his little brother, so on and so forth. So he actually has a pretty interesting conflict, but his brother might literally be the cocoon of Satan. um,
So Matt, they want to hit that monster and get to yesterday.
as well as just a whole bunch of other things that are kind of just going on that honestly don't matter. In fact, I'd say they matter less than like the ReZero weird witch knight general king thing that they did. Um,
I know, right?
uh, and it's just one of those things that just keeps going. I didn't actually read Cavalier of the Abyss. I read Immortal Aegis because that art was gorgeous for the time, specifically for the time. But since then, it's quite dated. Um, it has. Are you familiar with Ubelblot?
No.
basically it's Berserk, except wannabe Berserk, and to be fair, it does stand on its own, but it's not really as good as Berserk, and it's not as memorable as Berserk. It's a revenge fantasy story, except the villains are knights and kings instead of demon gods. Hello to Ken Dickinson, and it's not a Korean manhwa as far as I know. So that was the first. Like this is back in 2008 when I'm in high school. Is when the last like chapter came out for Immortal Regis. Or wait, hold on a second. Skipping. And honestly, looking back on it, it doesn't look as good as I remember, which is a real shame. Yeah, it came out in 2008. Um, the let's see here. Just trying to think it through. Um, Immortal Regis that got some pretty widespread popularity on the internet back when I was in high school. Last year at high school. You were what? How old were you? Were oh man, you probably weren't even on the internet back then, Anthony. Um,
I would have been young.
really young, like little toddling. Okay, Anthony, this is very important. And it's like, why'd you come out of the time machine? Listen, kid, you don't have much time. I need to make you into a weeb so we can do a live stream later in about 12 years.
I
Anyway.
just want to watch Tower of God. That'll be little me just going. Oh, that show looks cool. And go, no.
No,
This is what you must read.
and it's terrible. It's boring. So basically, um, I don't even know. Like this. I'm basing it on like when they came up online, not based on what they actually did. So you have your typical stuff, your typical fan service, and if we're being real, it's manhwa by location, not style. Um, it's a manga. It's in a manga style. It is just produced by a Korean, or as the Japanese would say, a filthy Korean. Uh, and I'm sure the attitudes haven't increased since then, as we have only now gotten.
The documentary, they were playing nice with the Koreans.
I just
On the documentary I saw of Tower of about them making God of High School, they were playing pretty nice with the Koreans.
oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. Especially since the history, because all the Asian races hate each other. Um,
Yeah,
yeah. I'm like half considering that if I get the chance, if I go over to Vietnam, I could convince people to support a space program just by saying the Chinese have one and they'll keep you out if they had the chance. Um, just immediately get like Moon Vietnamese or something. Uh, with a street vendor culture, just like instantly there. We're stuck in airlocks and there's some dude trying to sell us takoyaki. Anyway, unless you live in Chaz. That's true. That's true. So
Ken
then
is
there.
not so. Just to address what Ken said, he's not wrong. He said everybody plays nice when the camera's rolling, which is true. However, it was a Korean who directed God of High School and was working with a Japanese animation studio. So that seems like it's a good step forward, or something. I don't know. I don't know any of the context, but it
Right.
seemed nice.
In contrast, like China is developing their own state-run, I assume, uh, anime program, which is is different and it is alternatively. How do I want to put it? It's not bad, but it's not very exciting either. It's your typical tropes, and I don't really think they found a voice yet. Unlike their absolutely kick-ass puppetry shows, like 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 they apparently make enough money for Gen Urobuchi to write and direct their weird recorded puppet shows. So I assume they're doing something right there. Um, but back to Korea. So the big thing with Koreans is that in their comic industry is that they're up on webtoons and they're really into um, web based comics. Um, and they've got their own style, that sort of thing. And from what I can tell, it's fairly insular as well. They don't really bother with a lot of. Are you like outside?
Me, no. Oh, I know what's up.
All right.
Sorry, continue.
So they changed it up. So with things like uh what is it? So, I think you mentioned solo leveling, but there's a whole bunch of other like game extractions,
Yeah,
Chinaman,
I know.
bad cat,
Who
bad
was
Ken.
it?
It was
Haha.
solo leveling, but there was a bunch of
No,
other
I mean,
ones.
one of the YouTube critics did a rundown of Manhwa. In fact, he did a couple, but I'm blanking on the name.
Scramboli.
Yes, thank you. It was Scamboli. Scamboli did a rundown. I don't remember if I saw the full video. Actually, I don't think I did. For whatever reason, even though I normally do watch his stuff, I never got to his most recent one. But I do know that they have a lot of like, what we would think of as like light novel trapped in a video game type adaptations as well.
Yep, and
Which
it's
is too bad.
yeah, and like also things like the real world is video games. That also happens quite a bit. Um, Honestly, it's fairly interesting going through these things because I'm looking for a few of here, but they just don't seem to be. They're not really coming up here because honestly, it's such a new. Even though it's been around for like 12 years, it's still not like a lot of it is not. I misspelled manhwa. Huh. I am so
Oh
sorry.
no,
Huh.
you should be. It's horrible.
I know. It's all right. Because I was using the Chinese one, which is manhua. Save. Anyway, um,
Everybody just refers to them all as manga. Let's face it.
yeah, I know,
If they're Asian, they're manga, and we know it.
I know.
Manhwa even sounds stupid.
It does. Like they've got their own Dorothy of Oz, which is the Korean take on Wonderful
Oh,
Wizard of
so
Oz.
is it like a Wicked type thing, or is it less subversive? I don't
I
know.
I assume there's no word in Korean for subversive, because as far as I can tell, they are absolutely being just from some rumors I've heard, they are absolutely being wrecked by a rabid feminist cell. Um, that's just ruining everything. Anytime you hear of like a whole bunch of scandals from Korea, it's probably connected up into that. So here's the thing. Here's one. It's called Let's Bible. In a small fishing village in Croatia, young fisherman Vulcan Markovic encounters a beautiful woman dressed in nothing but a partially unbuttoned shirt, asking him to rescue for heavens. Naturally, as any sane person would do, his first reaction is to knock her unconscious, drag her onto his boat with his intent to have his way with her later. Which I'm actually going to go out on a limb here is the appropriate Slav reaction to this event. Unfortunately for Vulcan, this act ends up getting him caught in a battle against a mystical, superpowered mariachi that intends to kill the girl. The mariachi is a descendant of Lucifer Sancho, and the girl, second coming of Jesus. This is very strange.
Of course, why not?
Um,
So that I'm just gonna level with you. That sounds terrible, and I would probably hate it.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Like that, it's
just
just yeah. No, you're
throwing
absolutely
that
right.
out there.
From what I
On the
can,
other hand, I feel like that must have, if a pagan from ancient Greece were to come and read Percy Jackson, they would that's probably, I just realized that's probably what they would think of it.
Right? And then you realize that they're all like cut to the gills wrestlers with like one sport that they extended at. And yes, you can kill people with that sport.
Of course.
Um,
Oh no, I just find that just occurred to me now. I just realized that's like the Percy Jackson of Christianity. And yeah, if an actual pagan Greek who really believed in that religion, and of course those people, and no matter what they tell you, they're lying. They don't exist anymore.
that's true.
But you'll occasionally hear mostly atheists who are trying to be clever, claim that they still believe in the Greek gods, but they don't. So, but besides that, I'm imagining now that they have the exact same reaction I do when I hear that summary, as if they like saw a summary of the Percy Jackson series, and then they just go like, "Wait a minute, so." Are you trying to tell me that that the god Ares rides a motorcycle? And then you just
Sure.
have to solemnly explain that yes, and then they're just horribly insulted by the entire thing. So
Right.
now I don't know, it just gave me this weird pang of sympathy for like ancient pagan Greeks. Like this must be what it's like to have your culture fictionalized by people who know nothing about it.
Right. But, right. They got the Slav down pretty well, though. I'm just saying.
They
Um,
did.
the like I'm looking here. Apparently, so you remember the movie Priest?
Yes, vaguely.
I think it had Daniel Craig in it.
Never seen it.
That's
Heard of it.
I saw it. I own it. What am I doing? It's at the bottom of my stack. I'm not pulling it out.
Well, Priest Daniel Craig.
But
Let's see.
basically, that was a sequel to a manhwa about vampires and priests and stuff like that. That takes place 150 years out after it. So it's just weird. And there's the usual like video game extractions, like skeleton soldier couldn't protect the dungeon, and it's about uh basically his necromancer gets captured and he goes after her. Um, honestly, looking through all these, uh, jokes about Slavs aside, most of them don't really have much of a flavor to them. Have you noticed that?
Yes. One
Like,
thing about manhwa is that it really has not, from what I understand of it, and again, it's very limited, but from what I've heard from other people's descriptions and talking about it, it really hasn't developed as much of an identity as European, Japanese, or even American comics.
yep. And,
And American comics are horrendous nowadays, but at the very least, we have an idea of what American comics are.
right. They have a style, they have a specific flavor that you can follow to at least be it.
Mm-hmm.
The same with things like I recently rewatched Scott Pilgrim versus the World, basically skipping to the fight scenes, so I don't have to spend too much time with the actual characters. Um, but I also looked at panels from the comic, and it's got this what I guess we'll call the indie style that is basically minimalistic. Anyone can do it, and it manhwa feels like off-brand manga. You're absolutely right, Bradford. Uh, and it kind of doesn't have its own flavor, but it has a specific characterless flavor that you can do anything with. Um, just looking through this stuff, uh, the thing about like when you set up a new art for your culture, you have to have it embody the culture's ideals. That's why everyone, even if you've never seen it before, you know that China does that weird puppet thing. And every year there's at least 3 Journeys to the West that come out, or Adventures of Monkey, or something to do with Journey to the West. Um,
Right.
doesn't exactly matter what. Um, actually, you bring up a good point. European comics. I love a good French sci-fi comic as long as it doesn't have too much sex in it.
I do not follow European comics at all. I will say that I just happen to know, like, I remember looking it up and being vaguely surprised one day when I learned that everything you know is wrong, and actually the most popular comics in the world are European. They're
Yes.
not Japanese or American. And
Oh
by,
yes.
I think, outside of One Piece, with like the exception of the One Piece Batman Superman Holy Trinity, by a pretty fair order of magnitude, European comics are the most popular.
Yep. So, like, Tintin is the famous one. Ken brings that up.
I know Valerian and Laureline, and I know Tintin,
Yep.
but that's all I know off the top of my head.
The biggest
Okay.
ones are Mobius. Um, that's kind of the biggest name that people will probably recognize as an artist. But Judge Dredd is a multi-continent success.
Oh,
2000
really?
AD. Oh yeah,
I
2000
didn't know
AD
that.
has a whole bunch of different stuff. Um, like it's like those are the British versions. There's also Randall Flagg, which was a 1980s comic that I happen to have from a Christmas gift, and it's basically like Reagan the culture, the person. Um, I don't really understand it because Europeans kind of get weird about things sometimes, even if they understand something very well. Yeah, Judge Dredd is English, and he basically it's about fascism and the sort of weird stuff that England was experiencing in the 1980s that us Americans don't have any idea about. Um, like I've been to Paris, France, and there are art sellers on the streets and comics in every bookshelf, like
Yeah,
like
there's,
sales area.
to be fair, when I mentioned that European comics sell more than Japanese and American, this is true, but this is, with the caveat outside of like the big three, which is the three-headed, Superman, One Piece, Batman monster.
Yep,
And even then, One Piece right now is selling several orders of magnitude higher than everything else.
yep. But like One Piece is special. Like
It
that's
is.
that's the Mount Everest in like the Appalachian Mountains. Um, 2080 is all kinds of different things that don't really have much effect other than um, Judge Dredd, at least outside the UK. But it's pulled Dan Abnett, Garth Ennis, Neil Gaiman, Harry Harrison, Mark Miller, Alan Moore, and Grant Morrison. Basically, every comic writer or artist you've heard of, um, except for apparently a guy called Warren Ellis, who I don't know, has been through here. Um, so it's
Oh,
not
no kidding.
it's not like it's unimportant. It's I would say it's actually incredibly important. It's just that we've only really heard of Judge Dredd because that's what sells in America. Um, and honestly, I've read their stuff. It's absolutely fantastic. Um, but there's a certain feel about it that's different than um, the French stuff, which honestly doesn't really have as much a focus on, like, let's say Americans are hyper focused on the journey. Like, not the journey, the end of the journey. We got to get from one to the other.
Right.
We like a fast movement. People often criticize my work when I slow down to describe something because they feel like I'm not serving the plot. But when in reality, I'm trying to set a certain mood because I'm also English and I've read mostly English things. Like, you can have all the action you want, but there's something more to it. It's not just the pop cult, it's the full experience, creating art that's more than just what you digest and being remembered afterwards. Um, the European style, even though every country kind of does it differently, focuses more on the journey. Now, this is just the West I'm going to talk about for this one. So, in other words, there's an ending in sight. Like, there's an ending to Valerian, to not to Judge Dredd specifically, because that's an eternal serialized work. But they had for a I'm going to say for a contained story, there is always an ending in mind, but oftentimes they spend a lot of time meandering around or sort of like having weird side adventures. Like, there's this weird comic that's super sci fi. They're wandering around the wilderness in this giant man bot, and all of a sudden the girl with him is like, "Oh wow, this is so exciting. Let's have sex." And then, like, the robot sits down and it's like sex noises written on top of it, and I'm like, what? And then the robot stands back up and it continues on as nothing happened. The ending, where the captain character is released from his prison, and he's set to right the wrongs, and he meets his eternal rival in, like, the void under the void or something like that, and um he he and his rival, like, fight, but then they work together, and the rival sacrifices himself for the hero so that he could win in the end. And, like, it turns over itself so many times that, like, I don't really understand what's going on. I understand what's going on in the sense of, like, I know A plus A equals B or something, 1 plus 1 equals 2, but it's still weird. So, like, Europeans also, like, will randomly pick up on manga that takes a long time to go up in the US. You want to know where Blame is the most popular outside of Japan? Give me a guess.
Huh. That's a good question.
It's obvious. I
Uh,
guarantee it.
no, I got nothing.
Germany.
Yeah,
You can see it, right?
yeah, I could see it.
So, like, it even got to the point where it inspired a pretty good industrial band, but of the same name, called Blame. Uh, it really was just fantastic. Um, of course, this is like 10, 20 years ago. Yeah, Bradford Walker Goes Germany. Oh, you know it, Bradford. Um, Part of it is that Germans love the industrial stuff. They love harsh things, and they love to be kind of mystified, even though they barely have a creative spark in their soul that truly seeks the divine. Germans love a good mystery, and they love a good toothsome
Yeah.
thing. Um, the whole thing with France is that they do also pick up on manga. They love One Piece. They absolutely love One Piece, and they love JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Um, like, absolutely, like, they gave JoJo a piece of the Louvre for a bit.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah. I know that's one of the things everybody points to, that JoJo's is the first, and I think as of right now only piece of manga art ever displayed in the Louvre.
yeah, they've done, like, manga, like, collages before, but this is the first time they've done specifically for a manga. Um, so what I'm trying to do is I've set the stage for this stuff. There are specific channels that countries and people and groups really sort of latch on to. Um, the thing with Korean manga, manhwa, is that honestly they don't have their voice yet. I'm gonna say, Like right now, they've been trying to do what's popular. They want to do they actually have a pretty good romance community, as weird as it is to say, um, compared to um, Japan. Because honestly, there hasn't been a good new Japanese romance I've read in a very long time. Um, it's all boring and characters and cliche and stuff like that. With
So, you're not a domestic girlfriend fan?
no, what's domestic girlfriend actually?
Oh,
Just
really?
just just the name of it.
You don't know it. It's a legendary dumpster fire of a series that its most recent plot development was that the love triangle that
Oh
the main
yeah,
character had with his teacher and I don't know, like his sister who's not his sister, who although that might have also been the teacher. I'm not kidding. This is the show. Plus manga. It was made into a show, of course. He ends up he picks one of them, but then before they can get married, the other one gets into a car accident, ends up in a coma, and this causes him to realize he really loved her all along and changes his mind and decides to wait till she leaves the coma. I know this because Giga, who I normally don't really care about and don't really listen to, but he put out a video once that was called Domestic Girlfriend is a Dumpster Fire That I Can't Stop Reading. And then he did a video that was specifically on the coma thing, where he was just like, honestly, he goes, I have nothing but good things to say about this. He's like, this is exactly what I wanted out of Domestic Girlfriend. This was the reason I was reading it. And you know what? He's like, I approve of this development.
that's funny. Um,
Yeah. So the idea was that it was his theory was that Domestic Girlfriend was a manga that ran on hentai rules, but without the hentai. So the logic of they said you have to realize that how everybody acts, you have to read it as if it's a hentai, except it doesn't show any hentai. They just all act as if they're in one all the time, and when you say that, you realize you go, oh, and it all clicks.
yep, and
I
like
I have nothing else to say. This has, this is off topic. It's just because you mentioned romance, and that's literally the only one that I know of outside of Kaguya-sama, which is a rom-com and not really the same thing.
so what the reason why I sort of let it ride is because that's a very Japanese story. They have clubs where you blue ball.
Extremely.
Yeah, exactly. They have clubs where you blue ball yourself for money, uh, and like hot girls flirt with you. It's the hostess club in culture, and you have favorite like hostesses that I assume have too much pride to be on an OnlyFans. Um, so Brad Walker says, "Yeah, I saw that right away. Good college try, however. Yeah, you know." Um, I'm just sort of looking through here because there is like the thing with this stuff. I've been looking on webtoons, just flicking through them. Like there's one called Knights Run, which has a pretty decent following, like an 8.0 rating on webtoons, and it's got the same level of quality as one's One Piece webcomic, and it's got worse like scene composition. Um, and I like literally they're looking at each other. I swear he repeated like three panels like over and over again as people talk to each other. Then there was a picture of a very poorly positioned chick with absolutely gigantic tracts of land summoning up some sort of weird purple energy thing that was gone the next one. And like, of course, I can't read Korean. I'm sure it was very dramatic if I could read Korean, but it was terrible. It was absolutely garbage to look at. Like
That's funny.
like One Piece's sorry, what one's One Punch Man actually has incredible shot composition, beats, and setups for the gags. His fights are fantastic, and they always hit hard, even though the drawing is absolutely garbage. Um, people like to defend it, but no, it's garbage. Um, it wouldn't last
Um,
if he didn't.
Bradford Wa-
Hmm?
By the way, Bradford Walker just says that knowing Gigak's history, his terrible takes on anime makes sense now. I have nothing to add to that, but yes,
Yep. I have no idea what his personal history is, and I honestly don't want to know.
I I know very little about it, but like it had something to do with he moved to Japan with his girlfriend, but you could sort of tell listening to him that he's of the same cat type sort of type as Jeff.
Yep.
You know, I not to be mean, and that is an insult because I do
Eh,
not think Jeff is good.
right.
I think his takes are very basic. He doesn't add a lot to the discussion, except when he decides to pay close attention to something. Then he can. Then he has the ability to do good analysis if he wants to, but he normally doesn't because he has no character.
Yep. Like,
But whatever. Keep going. I'm sorry.
no, it's okay.
I just noticed Bradford wrote that, so
No, it's fine. In short, that entire clique's opinion should be taken as Bizarro World along with their girlfriends. Absolutely. Um, I did like the thing that kills me about some of this stuff is that we are all artists here. We're not marketers. We're not this. We're not that. You know, I make art for artists with these live streams, as well as for anyone who just happens to really come by. I make a live stream for it so that people can link to a live stream where they talked up their work. Um, and I usually support people's uh, things like that. But this whole Korean stuff, I've yet to cut across something that isn't something I haven't seen in Japan, and mostly better.
I
Um,
agree. But with that said, like Tower of God, for example,
yep,
Tower of God was pretty good.
yeah,
So I don't have the experience with the manhwa that you have. My experience is two anime adaptations that have currently come out, which are Tower of God season 1 is finished, and we're about halfway through the God of High School season 1. Tower of God season 1 anime I thought was pretty good. Now I was following some of the reaction to it, and it appeared to have been split pretty evenly among if you were a fan of the manhwa, then you were very disappointed at how rushed the pacing was.
mm-hmm,
And if you weren't a fan of the manhwa, you liked it. I had never read the manhwa, so I liked it. Yeah, doesn't necessarily make it a good adaptation, but I thought it worked fine as a show. Uh,
yep,
the God of High School is a little bit different. Its big selling point all along, and what everybody was excited about, was that it had kick-ass action scenes. They gave it to Studio Mappa. Studio Mappa is a famous action studio. Specifically, they did Ushio and Tora, which was the 2015 version, which was great.
mm-hmm,
And they even, for that matter, they also did Doro Hidoro, even though that was in a completely different visual style, but also had good action scenes. So
Dorohedoro
everybody
was
was
pretty good.
yeah. So even though it was a completely different visual style, but it still had good action scenes, and they did Dororo, which wasn't great but was pretty good. So point is, Mappa had a good they had a good track record, so there was a lot of hype surrounding them coming out with the God of High School, and I was looking forward to it. And the God of High School, much like Tower of God, has a similar. I have the same or a similar criticism in that yes, it does rush through a lot of the plot and emotional development moments. Unlike Tower of God, it's not nearly as plot heavy. Tower of God is extremely plot heavy. Uh, the God of High School is not. It's a big tournament arc,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a good one. And or I'm sorry, the God of High School is a big tournament arc, but it's a good but it's a very good tournament arc, so I can live with that. And most importantly, even though they rushed through some of the emotional stuff, the action scenes in The God of High School are absolutely kick-ass. Really, really fantastic stuff. Like great directing, great stunt choreography. I think they actually lost some viewers when it turned out that there were going to be supernatural elements in it, because originally it looked as if it was just going to be a martial arts tournament, and then it turns out that JoJo stands are involved. But I don't care. It still looked great, and that's really all I was there for. The characters did their job as far as I'm concerned. However, it is true that the emotional beats in it and the plot elements were very rushed. And I mentioned this before the live stream to you, but it was really weird because they have like a little documentary of the making of the show on Crunchyroll, and they were bragging about how quickly they rushed through this emotional plot point. They were like, yeah, this took a whole issue of the manga, and we managed to get through it in 10 minutes. And it's one of my favorite parts of the show. And I'm like, why? Why are you bragging?
Why do you hurt me like this?
Yeah, I'm like, I noticed that. It was very strange. But they seemed to think, like, he was very proud. He seemed to think he had gotten across everything that he needed to in those 10 minutes. But, you know, there's a point where you can't substitute that sort of thing. Like, you can't fake it.
Right.
You know, 10 minutes is 10 minutes. And
Right.
I saw it, and I could tell it was rushed because they wanted to get to the cool ass fight scenes. And you know what? If you're gonna do that, the fight scenes better live up to the hype, and they do. So I heartily recommend The God of High School. It is quite good, and I am going to continue watching it. The last episode was amazing. Even the emotional stuff in it hit pretty well. Though part of that was because I was, you know, following along with some people to make sure I understood everything properly. But I was affected by it to the extent that the narrative wanted me to be. So that works. However, it is definitely, you're right that there's nothing original about it.
Never is.
It's based on Journey to the West in the same way that, you know, very, very loosely, in the same way that Dragon Ball is based on Journey to the West very, very loosely. So the main character, as many people have pointed out, is pretty much Goku. And which is a little bit unfair because it's more like both of them are really the main character of Journey to the West. But, you know, Dragon Ball exists one way, and it's the premier martial arts manga. People forget that originally it was very much a martial arts manga, but that's absolutely was its bread and butter in the early days. So if you're going to make a martial arts manga, you're going to have to live with being compared to that. And when you have a main character who is basically the same as the Dragon Ball main character, then, you know, what do you expect?
People forget that early on it was less of fighting anime, more like adventure anime with fighting thrown in.
So it's not original at all, but it's good. Tower of God is a similar thing. I will give Tower of God some props in that. I thought that the world of Tower of God was pretty cool. But at the same time, if you're talking about, you know, things that people need to climb from one end to the other, Made in Abyss was cooler, probably. So that wasn't like the most original thing in the world either, but you know, there were a lot of ideas in there, so I appreciated it.
Right.
But there was definitely something to it where it felt as if these were people who were copying anime in some ways. Bradford says Gigak's a bug man wearing a Thai skin suit that speaks with a London accent. Basic is his brand. Yes. Digibro, in his big debate with Giga, called him the Naruto of Anitubers, which caused the whole crowd to go, ooh. But he's absolutely correct. If
So
anything, I think he might be being a little bit nice.
I don't have as much hate for Giguk as I do for Jeff.
No, I don't hate. I wouldn't say I hate Giguk. I don't really
No,
care about Giguk. Every
right.
now and then, if a video pops up and I'm bored, I'll put it on. But I don't even think I'm subbed to his channel.
Sometimes he's pretty entertaining. So
I'm subbed to Jeff for his OP analysis and his fight analysis, which are, because again, that's actually makes Jeff even more disappointing, because if Jeff tries, he actually can do good work.
One of the things I'm looking forward to, speaking of trying good work, is actually like seeing more Korean based stuff. There was a manhwa that I have forgotten about, that I have rediscovered. And I usually forget about it for years, rediscover it, and read it, because it is one of the best fighting manga this side of, like, not like mystical fighting, but like fighting manga. This side of, ooh, I don't know. Um, I don't watch basic fighting. I don't read basic fighting stuff. But it's called Change Guy. It was written like 13 years ago. So this is back, like, way back when. And the basic story arc is that the toughest guy in school and the biggest nerd have swapped their bodies when a mad scientist makes a mistake. And so the nerd is stuck in the hardest kid in school's body, and he has to fight his way through people and fight his way up the chain. He has to fight, an alliance of schools. He has to fight the biggest bully in his school, so on and so forth. And it picks up to like underground fighting, and then it ratchets it up to like a special prison for juvies who have like insane power levels, and he has to fight his way through that. But eventually, he brings them all together, and they break out of the academy, as it's called, to wreak havoc on the powers that tried to lock them up. Um, it's a pretty interesting story as far as things go, and the fight scenes are amazing, and I still remember them to this day. Uh, there's one where his chief rival, like, he has a rival through the center 2/3 of the series, where it's just him and the other guy just fighting each other, getting powerful, overtaking each other, and they finally have this amazing fight where the guy gets punched out, but his rival stays standing, even though he's clearly unconscious. Like, that was one of the first times I actually saw that in play, and it was absolutely amazing. Um, as well as just in general, like, the villains are always portrayed as insane fighters, that sort of thing. But then they might have a heart of gold if you just beat it out of them. Uh,
One of
um,
those stories.
yes, and like these guys are absolute maniacs, but he allies with them to break out of the academy, and it's like, yeah, this kid killed 50,000 people or something stupid like that with his bare hands. Uh, anyway, this one, even though it's relatively dated, is definitely worth a read, because it does have a lot of good funny moments, and the fight scenes are a solid 10 out of 10. I've linked it in the chat for people to read if they want to check it out. So that I forgot about, but that's actually a manhwa which I can say, I'm gonna say this was a more enjoyable read for me, even when I reread it a couple of years ago, than Tower of God. Like, Tower of God as is, how do I want to put it? It's Hunter x Hunter with a Korean twang. Twang. Um, it's got the same sort of thing where various characters have different abilities. There's weird, quirky characters all over the place. There's rival characters and whatnot. Thankfully there's no Hisoka. Um, but not that Hisoka was a bad part of Hunter x Hunter. It was just weird. It was just a weird part of Hunter x Hunter. Um,
I like Hisoka. Or Hisoka, I don't
eh,
even know how to pronounce him.
Hisoka. Yeah,
He worked as a good counterpoint to Gon, I think, in some ways.
he did. Uh, really, what that was one of the things he was best at. If he just existed in a vacuum, it would be weird. Um, Tower of God. Tower of God was enjoyable. Um, I never finished it though, just
It is
because
still going.
the anime.
The manga.
Oh, I didn't read the manga. Who do you think I am? The manhwa.
Oh, I see. Okay. I thought you were talking about that specifically, but you never finished the anime?
Nope. I got in like episode 7, and then there was a gap, and I just never got back to it.
I mean, honestly, that's understandable because it was certainly not the best show, and I wouldn't even have called it the best show of that season. Uh, that season, Gleipnir also came out, which I thought was better, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, neither show I would call great, but I would call both very solidly above average.
Hmm. Like it's ranked 41 on Mal, which is always pretty interesting. When it gets
41 on Mal is actually really high, really high.
eh,
When you think about it.
yeah, I guess. Let's see what God of High School is at. God of High School is at 831.
That's yeah, like I said, it was everybody was really excited at first, then like the JoJo stands came out and everybody kind of running. Decadence, by the way, was the same way. After episode 1, everybody was really hyped over it. Now
Yeah.
episode 2, just think about this for a moment. Even in a year, a season, this week, I don't even think Decadence is in the top 10 shows, which is crazy and
There's not.
absolutely
There's just 10 shows,
and
Anthony.
sad.
There's just 10 shows.
Yeah,
No.
which is sad.
Right.
This is counting sequels too, mind you. But
Yeah.
you know, because ReZero is number 1 by a landslide.
One Piece, Shokugeki no Shoma, and so we can
But
point out exactly
which
what
is
went wrong with that.
crazy that Decadence is not in the top 10. Because first off, Decadence has been consistently good. It's
They
still good.
ruined their own premise.
Do you think it was ruined?
Yes.
So you after watching, how far up did you watch it right now?
I slept through half of episode 2.
Oh, so you didn't even see what they did with it.
Yeah, all right. I should probably
I
watch the
mean,
rest of it.
look, I agree with you to some extent. I am not in the camp. Everybody seems to be very is very in who it has like now basically a rabid fan base because the people who are still watching it are obviously going to be the people mostly who were always all in on it.
Yeah.
So you'll just see a bunch of people going, "Oh man, it works so great." I'm not convinced that the big twist worked as well as they wanted it to. Now we're at like what 7 episodes in or something like that,
Hmm.
and I'm still not sure if it actually added more than it took away from the show. With that said, every episode has been pretty consistently entertaining.
Hmm.
So I certainly don't think it ruined the show. However, I would say that the jury is still out if it was actually a good move or not.
Yeah. Like so, what we're talking about is that it starts off and it's this amazing humanity on a moving building, um, desperately eking out an existence with the help of an alien um, helpers. We'll say. Turns out the aliens have been treating this like an MMO and just kind of going out there to harvest the monsters for things and experience and points and stuff like that. And it was very weird to me. And I just kind of like the second I realized that they were going with the game thing like explicitly, like we're not talking just hinting at it throughout the season or that characters have these little things. No, it is a main focus plot point. for how the story goes and for what the non-human characters are all about. Basically, how do I want to put it? Basically, even if it returns to cool, wacky Miyazaki fun times with a little bit of drama, the premise in the back of your mind is that fully half of the characters you see that are not human will be playing a game, and that kills dramatic tension for me.
Well, here was my issue with it when I saw it that made me kind of go, I don't know what I think about this. You know, when that scene happened, when they have the big reveal and everything in that episode,
Episode 2.
I was like, okay, yeah, episode 2. I was like, okay, so here is my problem. And maybe it won't be a problem, but I need to see how they tackle it then. This is the real conflict, not the whole thing with the Gadal, right?
Right.
The thing with the Gadal is a joke. It doesn't matter at all. Except insofar as it's a vehicle for the real story and the real villains of the story, which are the aliens. Are we actually going to be fighting against the real villains here? Are we going to be actually making headway against the actual main plot of the show? Or are we going to be skating around it forever? And the answer that I have at this point in it is I don't know. Okay, so I'm gonna spoil it, but you've already been spoiled on the biggest twist of the show now anyway, anybody who was listening, so it's already ruined for you. So ruining it worse, oh well. So you know her boss, right? The boss who was an alien.
I thought he
No,
was a human, but he was working with the
no.
aliens.
His whole thing was that he was an alien who was a very player, but he was caught cheating with two other players and they killed the other players. But they keep him alive in exchange for he needs to go undercover among the humans as an repairman and take out any bugs in the game. So anybody who is not following the rules as set out by the aliens, right?
Hmm.
So this is our guy, and we learn that what happens in the last 2 episodes. 2 episodes ago, our main character Natsume, I think, she ends up in the army. She's trained by, I'm gonna call him boss, I forget his name, it's like Kapsaruki or something, or
Hmm.
Kabsaruki. So boss though is what she always calls him, so boss. So boss trains her because he realizes that she's actually a bug herself, that she was declared dead years ago and technically has no file in this game, but but she's still around. And also, she doesn't kill his pet Gadal, which I think he appreciates, and she doesn't panic over his pet Gadal. So he trains her to help her get into the army, but then he learns that, they're going to be going after a Gadal nest, and the humans think that this is going to end the war. But Boss knows for a fact that they have no intention of letting them actually win this battle because it would end the game, right?
Right.
So he tells her not to do it, but he can't explain why, and obviously she won't listen. And in a really good episode, she ships out, and then the boss shows up mid episode and kills the monster, and kills the head monster in the nest. And supposedly this should destroy all the Gadal. But then they're forced to, they call it rolling out a patch or an update or something. And you learn that actually now there's a whole other level of even more powerful Gadal waiting in the background. And the boss, for breaking the rules and helping them out and, forcing them to roll out this update early, is killed. And then in the episode after that, the twist is, of course, he's not dead. It was his avatar that was killed. And before he is going to be killed, they decide to spare him We don't know exactly why, because they make that it's a plot point. They make that ambiguous, like we don't know why he was spared, but he's sent to some sort of like underground prison or work camp, and that's where he was in the last episode. And they was going, and I think he had just gotten a new avatar, like an underground avatar, and gotten back into the game. So this is, I think, 7 episodes in now. So the reason I'm describing all of this in as much detail as I did, which actually isn't that much detail, but the reason I described all of that is because what I'm getting at here is Natsume's story has still not intersected with the boss's story. And I am still not sure what they're intending to do, or if it will make any sense, or like I don't know what the end game is yet. And for that matter, I don't really see a path to an end game right now, which is what's confusing me. Like, clearly, there is no way for them to take out this alien menace, or to get on any sort of negotiating level, or to reveal the truth in a way that would make sense for anyone. So I don't really know where the story is going. And on one hand, that's a good thing, but on the other hand, it also feels kind of directionless. Like, I don't get what the point is yet. However, it's all been very well done, so I intend to keep watching.
I get you, and you know what? That sounds better than that sounds better than what I thought they were going with it, because to me it was very abrupt, very strange, and
It
not
was, yes.
very worthwhile.
I think a lot of people dropped it after episode 2, which is now why, of the people who are still watching it, everybody is like, I don't understand why everybody dropped it, because of course these were people who were always on board with the twists, so why would they, why would they
Right.
be bothered by it anyway? But I'm kind of somewhere in the middle there, where I'm really not sure where they're going with it. And in some ways that's a good thing, but in other ways it makes it very unfocused. Because again, like, they can't continue this conflict with the Gadol. It doesn't make any sense. However, I don't really see how they can make a jump to a conflict with the aliens, because I don't really see any direction they could go where that would make any sense. And I don't really see how Natsume's story and the boss's story can properly intersect in that way. I'm curious to see if they can manage to bring all of this together. I will be tremendously impressed, but they haven't done it yet, and I'm still waiting.
Yep. The one of the so I'm gonna focus us back on there. One of the things I've noticed is that, like, much with two diverging plots of decadence, because I always have to bring it through any thread that connects the two subjects I want to talk about. So it doesn't actually feel like I arbitrarily decided to talk about Manhwa again. So there's something I've been noticing as I've been doing more and more research, um, and that is there seems to be two classes of manhwa. The first one is the anime manga related stuff that I was mentioning before, the Immortal Regis, Cavalier of the Abyss, Change Guy. Now, of course, Change Guy is actually worth seeing, but you know. Then we've got um, stuff that I'm gonna say is optimized for webtoons, and that's your Noblesse, your Tower of God, your um, God of High School, and apparently Let's Bible, uh, the Slav Life Simulator. So with the manga stuff, it's harder to properly pick them out of the manga, because they take basically the same plot line, but they just change up locations and the names of the characters. Instead of your average Japanese name or some jumble of words that people think is a good name. Um, I want to say this. I'm going to go on a quick rant. Fall is a terrible last name or name in general that you can put into a character. It doesn't
What name?
have fall. So, like, I was looking through a bunch of stuff and I discovered a character by the name of, like, Melis Fall or something like that. And I just thought that was the dumbest name ever. Because it sounds so bad. Fall is not a good word to put into a name because it is too long for how many letters and syllables it has. And it is not dynamic at all. So, like, it's not that it's FA something or anything like that. It's that it takes too long to say and it makes it sound terrible. So back to the manhwa stuff. That stuff, it follows the same conventions except for names and locations. Otherwise, it's fairly, there's nothing to distinguish it. It's in the manga style, except usually it's a little sharper on the eyes, and they don't focus on the sort of excuse me shojo stuff that most places focus on. Um, like they won't go for as many rounded eyes or whatever. Then there's the webtoon stuff, which is more up in the air of explicit style, but it has a more commercialized feel to it that is both more Korean but less individual. Most of the more interesting styled stuff is not from, I'm going to say, obviously Korean artists. It seems to be from characters like Westerners who just translated out for this stuff. Um, and then have what I'm going to say is a, I don't know, Western style to it. Like what I talked about much earlier in the conversation, where it's scribbing in make Star Night anime real, stretch goal 2 million. Yeah, I'll put up a couple hundred for that, Bradford. I want a Star Night anime. Where it's westernized to the point where I can't say it's a Korean style. Like I'm reading the one with all the that's the melodrama, um, with all the Greek gods in it, and honestly, it's following the Korean like vertical webcomic style, but it's not actually anything I'd say is unique. It looks better than some of the stuff, but not all of it. Let's see here. I made a joke about Poseidon bringing his wife. It's like, ha. Anyway, what's weird is that, like, despite the fact that Poseidon does have, like, paramours, it's not as bad as Zeus, and Amphitrite seems to be cooler with it than anyone else. I'm looking at other ones, another Western style. Uh, this one I think is actually, yes, that's an actual Westerner. Doing, it looks like, I don't know, a Black Phantom, I guess. There's another one that's more manga oriented on webtoons, but the art is fairly. Let's take a look at this. See how the art I'm seeing so far is fairly stiff and uninteresting. Some of the
I've
characters
noticed that the artwork of manhwa just generates
is
manga.
yeah.
Noticeably so. Even Tower of God.
Yeah. Like the character designs of Tower of God are pretty good. Um, like in the
Yeah,
one
that I'll give them.
the character designs of this is pretty good, and there's actually a couple panels that are pretty great, but then there's some panels that just aren't, and this is an action scene. So it's fairly important. Um, and then like he ruins it with some actually terrible dialogue panels and then a scene where they're walking away from the explosion, but everything's cut to black, and the shadows are done in such a way that their silhouettes aren't as distinguishable as I think they think it is. So it just doesn't feel like anything. And it's supposed to be the badass moment where like the crew is together and they have to fight off all the villains and stuff like that. Um, it could have been so much better, but it just isn't what it needs to be. Um, hmm. And it's just kind of you know uninteresting. Like
One
there's
of the things I've seen is that there was a theory for a while that the next big frontier in anime was going to be manhwa. And I feel like after Tower of God came out and got that mixed reaction, mostly positive, but there was definitely like, mixed in the sense that there was a clear split,
hmm
between people who thought it was really pretty good and people who were, big fans of the original who just thought it was horribly rushed.
hmm
And I'm thinking that's probably actually not going to end up being the case. But for
oh
a different
yes,
reason than a lot of people think. That, everybody thinking it's going to be the next frontier. From my, again, this is a limited understanding, but from what I know of it, both listening to you and seeing the art and even seeing plot summaries and how similar they are to anime, manhwa is just generally not good enough.
yep.
Like, I'm not saying that there will be no good shows that come out of it. As a matter of fact, there is a good, there were two good shows based on it. It's a Tower of God and the God of High School were both pretty good, but that's the problem. I'm not sure how much better you're ever going to get than either of these shows, and neither of them were that great. Now I get that Tower of God and this are criticized for not being as good adaptations as they could be, but really, even when you get right down to it, they're not the most original shows. You're not going to give
hmm
me much more than I couldn't get from a shonen. So if this
Yeah.
is the new frontier, you're not really giving me anything,
So
you know,
it
that
would.
manga's not giving me.
I would call it a frontier um, if it was doing something new. But from what I can tell on this, like we we keep coming back to the fact that while some things are done well, like Change Guy is a genuine, fantastic fighting anime. It's got lots of excitement, lots of drama, everything you need, a couple of tournament arcs, so on and so forth. Um, but it doesn't do anything new. The premise is pretty good. You put the weak nerd into the body of the hardest high schooler, and it's interesting, but it's still not quite the same way. Then you meet the hard high schooler, and he's in the weak guy's body. He's like, "You've got no muscle mass. The only thing I could learn was judo." And then it turns out he's like the best judo guy in the world because he hasn't lost his fighting spirit. Um, real fun things like that. Like Cavalier of the Abyss and Immortal Regis does nothing that something like Ubel Blot or Berserk does, and does better. Because Ubel Blot is still serialized after like 10, 15 years. More than that. More, actually, yeah. Like, I remember reading about it in like high school. Um, the stuff like these pathetic romances that I'm reading don't have better art than something like Faster Than a Kiss, which I read in high school. They don't have better art than Shirayuki, whatever her name was, the red hair chick. Medieval romance. Like it doesn't compare to what I would consider mid tier on this stuff. There's even been some like manga that I've seen where they've tried for horror, but I remember horror like that was done by in a Western style by Japanese artists that was far more spooky. It was like a fairy tale thing, except Riding Hood has a minigun, and like it rides on Frankenstein's shoulder, and there's blood and guts and horror and everything like that. And even though it was an absolute gore fest, it still had the beats, like the stuff I'm doing. And then I look at what's popular per age group. Like every set of males likes the same stuff, like Unordinary, Let's Play, Cursed Princess Club, Down to Earth, um, and it's they're like My Deepest Secret, and they all look terrible. The males in their 30s have a slightly different one, but honestly, I know that males in Korea are mostly emasculated. Um, Anyone who looks at their music videos and what they consider the epitome of male beauty can tell that, because it's effeminate, it's thin armed, like I know that most Asian countries except China have more women than men in general, but it's one of those things where like the men that they do have, you can't tell except in the facial features. Like if someone had presented a flat chested woman to me and says, "Oh, this is such and such," like, well, why don't you try out? Go on a date. It's like, I'm gonna have to see that ID just in case. You don't want a surprise on your wedding night after all. Um, why is everyone whispering and giggling? It's weird. I don't get it. Never thought you had it in you, Ben. What are you talking about? Oh, ho, ho, you scamp. It's like, no. No. But
Wake up in a cold sweat.
right.
Next to you is your Misharu body pillow.
Right. Oh, thank you.
Go,
Oh,
thank
good.
God,
Oh.
Michiru. You'll never leave me.
Then there's the fire. No, Michiru. Um the centaur body pillow or the lamia body pillow. 40 feet of body pillow. Oh. But but I've seen their ideals in movies and art and webcomics, and they're completely different. These are well-formed, masculine-looking men. Like even when they're playing up a romantic comedy where the lead is a clear scamp and sleeping around with a lot of women, and playing with their hearts, the problem is that one's like a samurai and out to kill them, that sort of thing. It's very funny. It's like Bride Wars or something. Um, the men are still masculine. They've got that masculine qualities. So the problem isn't with their art, it's with their culture. And I have a theory that because Korea has been curb stomped by either Russia, Japan, or China, mostly China or Japan, for the last all of its existence, um, in some way or some form, somehow, um, or dominated by as a culture, even when they produce their own art, they cannot escape it. They cannot escape the Japanese Chinese influence. What do you think?
I mean, that makes as much sense as anything else. I just know, I'm hoping that it's just a time thing. They started making their, their versions of manga later, and maybe after a little bit of time, eventually we're gonna see the first real masterpiece. But it hasn't come yet, to my knowledge.
Yep.
Now, again, I could be wrong because I am not closely involved with this. I'm literally going off of, though, like you said, if you look on the website, you could just kind of tell looking at it. None of these ideas, they all look like ideas I've seen in manga, but that manga have actually, sometimes at least, done well. And I'm tired of it there too. So the idea of manhwa being a new frontier, it's like, it's just not offering me anything new.
Yep.
I mean, the God of High School is, you're giving me more workman-like products, but and don't get me wrong, I don't think that there's necessarily anything wrong with going to good
Manhwa.
manhwa. Wow, could not say that word. I don't think there's anything wrong with going to good manhwa and saying that you want to make an adaptation of it, but to say that you're going to use this to revolutionize the industry in some way, shape, or form is something that I'm very much not confident in as of right now. You're going to have to show me, what they're offering, because that's the thing. It doesn't even need to, I'm not even necessarily looking for like a masterpiece, because I could tell you, for example, what America could offer that Japan couldn't, even though current American comics are absolute garbage right now.
Yep.
But we have an identity.
Mm-hmm.
There is no question there is an identity to American comics. There's so much of an identity that you could use the American you can fuse the American identity with the Japanese identity to good effect in stories like My Hero Academia, Tiger and Bunny, One Punch Man, right?
Yep.
I mean, I can't really see like what would a sort of fusion of Korea of manhwa and manga look like. What I could see, it would just look like, any other manga.
Mm-hmm.
It, I can't really imagine because it doesn't really have any sort of identity. I would think, if anything, if they really want to look for a next frontier, you would probably go to European comics.
Yep.
And they've done that to an extent, but the only manga adaptations that I know of European comics are Valerian and Laurelin, I think they've done before, and
Right.
some shonen called Radiant, which should barely count because it's pretty much Japanese shonen that just happened to be written in French.
I didn't know about it.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I know it. I know it only because I saw it said, "Oh, another shonen." I'm a fan of shonen. Let me look that up. It didn't look great, but it was French,
Mm-hmm.
and that was its claim to fame. That was its only claim to fame. It was exactly like any other shonen, complete with the character types, the type of story, the visual style, but it was French, which almost seems like, why are you even bothering to me? But I don't know. I guess
Right.
if it's popular, it's popular.
Right.
So I shouldn't be mean. But it
Yeah.
didn't look that interesting to me.
It.
But yeah, like in
Mm-hmm.
America, if you were to tell me what sort of story for an what American comic would you point to for like a sort of American type of comic story, and I would point to, I don't know, whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which was like Superman's final golden age issue or something like that, or Daredevil Born Again, even if you want to go a little bit darker,
Yep.
which is my favorite comic. But I can't really do that with a manhwa. I can point to the most original manhwa I could think of is Tower of God, because the setting is at least something kind of interesting. The only thing is that the overall idea isn't really that unique. There isn't much to it.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's.
I'm repeating myself at that point, but I find that a little sad in that I don't I know that there are people like Hideaki Anno who have been predicting the death of anime for a while, and I have actually gone on the other end of this. I've been arguing, and I still would argue that anime has actually been on the upswing for the past few years.
Yep.
This year, I think has to be. I think you have to look at this year as a weird exception because of everything going on with the pandemic and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't really look at this year at all. And even then, the fact that it hasn't been completely barren is impressive enough in itself.
Yep.
That there's been anything good produced at all, and there has been. But besides that, so Hideaki Anno's dire predictions, and I mean it is Hideaki Anno who's like the poster boy for depression. So take it all with a grain of salt, I guess. But Hideaki Anno predicting the death of anime, it's something that's hard for me to really get behind on, because I'm looking at the anime coming out and going, really, I thought the anime over the last couple years has actually been pretty good. So if anime's dying, I'm not seeing it. But the flip side of that is they're clearly looking for a place to go next and they're not finding it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what that means, but it can't be good.
I gotcha. I think Hideaki Anno is tainted a bit because he is a a very depressed man sometimes, but also his view on anime isn't necessarily a bird's eye view. He's been screwed over multiple times and is in
Yes.
complex legal battles, of which only the Asians could possibly invent for themselves.
Oh,
Um,
his friggin' interactions with Gynax are wild.
right?
And
It,
they're wild, and I'm also, by the way, as far as I understand it, and I could be wrong, but as far as I understand it, I'm completely on his side.
mhm. Oh,
And
absolutely.
it at least certainly looks to me like he's just been screwed over by his friend, people calling himself his friends over and over and over again, taking advantage of the fact that he doesn't have much business sense, but after the first time he was screwed over was just smart enough to wrestle out the rights of Evangelion,
Yep.
because if he hadn't been smart enough to do that, who the hell knows what would have happened. But yeah, that's his whole thing is wild. But I think he thought he was predicting like that China would be the next frontier in animation. Then he thought that Japanese anime was gonna pretty much go under, and that China would be the next frontier.
Hmm.
But that's again where, if he's right, and I don't know if he is, because I don't necessarily trust Hideaki Anno's take on it, since I don't really share his taste in anime anyway. But if he is right, that's not a great sign, because China has not put out great stuff. So, are we heading towards a glorious Chinese future?
Hmm.
They get
No,
rid of the comp.
absolutely not. Um, Part of the problem is that it's the spirit of the people that makes it as much as anything else. You can produce as much state-run garbage or as amazing puppet shows as you want, but without a spirit behind it, it honestly isn't interesting, or even worth much talking about. Um, the Chinese are not the same thing as Japanese, or Koreans or Vietnamese. They're not the same thing as Americans, and they don't have the same spirit. Um, like like America's is pretty great, but the changes that go on, like there's sort of an ideal American which we strive to embody, and then there's like the American common, which is a different sort of thing. The soy boys and bugmen and Karens and thoughts and so on and so forth. But like
Well,
with hold on, I got to kind of meander a bit before I come back around.
you're on
So
a roll.
I'm on a roll. So with Hideaki Yamo's claim that manga and anime will die, there isn't really anyone to inherit the mantle of anime or manga except for the Japanese. Um, you can't go to China, because here's the thing about China: they're running into a hideous instability problem in 20 to 30 years. And honestly, I'm surprised they don't have more social uprisings, just because of the fact of like a third of their men can't find wives or something dumb like that. Um, like it's ridiculous how imbalanced their male to female ratio. Normally, that would call for men to go out in raiding parties or found their own city, because Rome was started literally by a bunch of incels, who had to kidnap their wives, to get married. And I'm joking, I'm exaggerating, but having a huge population of young men is is always a difficult thing to have, because it does lead to instability, because eventually a guy's going to stop jacking off and decide, what, I want something better for myself. And you can use the internet and push that off a few years, but when their parents start to die, it's going to get really bad. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see the current regimes fall. um, I had a friend who's more politically savvy than I explicitly say that they're in the equivalent of a late middle period. And a lot of Chinese people are scared about the future because they can smell the end coming near. Because the Chinese have the opinion that there's always going to be a China broken up, separated, or put back together. And those are hard times. But there's always going to be a China. So it's like they still work for the future, but they don't necessarily believe in the immediate future. What I mean to say is that that isn't a situation that creates great art. If you're worried about tomorrow or in 10 years or about the dams that are bursting or about the diseases that's still ravaging their country or about the flooding, which is considered incredibly bad omens. Like if a dam fully breaks in China, like that's to them like the gods removing the mandate of heaven from their rulers. And there's 1,000 and other different things here. Uh, Bradford Walker agrees with me. They're going to hit that wall much sooner once the three Ganges breaks. Oh, and those men are a pile of soft soy boy only sons. You're right, but the thing is that doesn't change the nature of their resentment. That just means that they're not going to go out raiding. They're going to not produce. Basically, they're going to be a generation of produce nothings. My point was is that they are not the type to produce art. They might produce pornography, but they're not going to produce art. Very specific. And it also means that there aren't going to be many heroes. Like it's kind of like the Gen Y millennial problem. Like I might be a man and I'm about to start a diet tomorrow and I'm going to be doing this and I'm going to be trying to break my personal records and I'm going to be, working out hard and I'm going to be producing the horror podcast, and like I've made a prototype of the first episode of the horror podcast. That's an achievement. And I did it like at 5 a.m. The day on the same sleep cycle of my birthday. I guess I'll say that's an easier way to put it rather than just saying day is my birthday. I had not slept since then. So 4:30, I spent half an hour recording the prototype episode of Pinkerton's Ghosts. Like I am doing things. Anthony, you're doing things. I know other young men
Right.
who are doing things. Whether it's as simple as just being the best weightlifter you can be, or if it's, going to produce, going to college, or trying to pursue a certain job or whatever, or just making a family. Like young men are doing things in America. We're just very quiet about it, and we don't want that whole like woman praise thing. Now, of course, when we have a Patreon, if you guys could support our Patreon. No, I'm kidding. But sort of. But the spirit that infuses us is different. I know that I'm not going to make waves like I probably could have done 70 years in the past or 70 years in the future. But that's not about that. It's about doing the best I can with it. But what if you have a people that doesn't have a God, doesn't have hope, doesn't have gyms everywhere, they don't have this cultural self encouragement, and if you go outside and you step off the sidewalk for a second, you're dinged 10 points of your social score or something like that. That beats down at people. I'm going to say that if anime, not manga, if specifically anime dies in Japan, no one will retake the mantle except the Japanese themselves. And I could believe that we're heading into a gap year. Like right now, those demographics, male to female, are terrible in Japan. They're not as bad as China because people like look at a graph. Oh, Japan's so peaked and everything like that, but China's in the billions. So it's a different scale than little dinky
Yeah.
Japan. Like even if Japan, does it, their elders are the respectful types, and they're literally designing robot servitors to help increase uh, hands, I guess, caretakers in their own thing. Like Japan will not let their elders suffer because their elders are not the same as our baby boomers. Not at all. No one's
No,
gonna
they're completely different
completely
cultures.
different cultures. The there's a famous one about Hiroshima. Not Hiroshima. The the um, the atomic plant breaking up. A whole bunch of elders just kind of walked over there if they were of sound body, and they literally said, because we only have a few more years to live, we shall brave the radiation to save some younger people from having to do this dirty work. Like that is a Chad thing to do. Um, let's see here. Uh, there's a reason. Bradford Walker says there's a reason you're seeing channels run by foreigners start talking about female Japanese dating and marrying foreigners. That's right. So there's a problem with that people don't notice. Partially, it's because honestly we have a mystique about Asian women. Uh, Even though I'll probably end up marrying someone, it's
I'll marry somebody Vietnamese, Ben.
probably they'll probably be Catholic, Anthony. Don't you worry. Or at least nominally Catholic. Is that Asian women are practical. They're not as practical as Russian women, who I hear are absolutely cutthroat. But if you can get them to love you, you're set forever. But it's because they're kind of a mix. They're half and half. Um, where the women will refuse their own men if they're not of high enough status. And because that, foreigners are usually white, not the black foreigners. The black foreigners are trash to them. I'm sorry to say. If anyone's out there looking for it, they like the Chinese are the worst of it because of course they are. But in Vietnam, like they hire tutors because they're white, not because they speak good English. It's a really horrifying reality for some of that stuff. That even myself is kind of like, whew, spicy. So, like, the Japanese women have refused to date their own. Um, they have refused to date their own people. There's two for that. They have too high standards, and the men have too low standards for themselves. So it's like they're not meeting themselves in the gaps. Like, I could probably do well in Japan teaching English. I could probably, find a better class of Japanese girl than I could a white girl and, make it work for me. Um, but the thing is that sometimes it feels like cuckoldry for the Japanese men because I show up. I can deadlift 335 pounds. I bench press 265 pounds. Like I'm well on my way to bench pressing my own weight of like 335 pounds. Like it's going there. But the Japanese men not so much. They have that otaku culture. I want to say maybe a third of the population actually will love each other for themselves and be of the same status, while the other thirds, like the women and the men who don't fit into that stuff, are not going to be able to meet in the middle because of how they are. Um, it's a sad fact. Like it's almost the opposite effect of what we have here in America, where it's it's just a horrid culture, and there it's the logical extension of that culture. But the problem is that what used to work no longer works. I think it'll fix itself by the time I die of natural causes. Fingers crossed. But ultimately, it's they're in a bad way. Um, I don't feel so bad about Vietnam because they have more women than men, but um, it's it's not a healthy situation for anybody involved. Oh well. Uh, So let's finish up the stream. Anthony, what's your final word for us?
Uh, I don't know where anime. I don't know if this is a good indicator of anything, and I like to think not. But I certainly hope that Hideaki Anno is wrong. There's the two ways to look at it are that on one hand, everything's true, and that's a problem.
In one hand,
The
what is true?
everything that you just said,
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
and that's a problem. But the flip side of it is that those that come out recently, I think they've been mostly pretty good. Even in this extremely barren year due to the pandemic, I actually think there have been several shows that have been pretty good, which is saying something, which is
Mm-hmm.
impressive. So I can't really say that anime isn't good. Uh, on the other hand, they're clearly looking for, what are we going to do next? And if they're looking at China and they're looking at Korea, that's not going to be the answer. So I can only hope that Japan can find something in itself. And I guess we'll see. The saddest part of all is that America has the chops to have an animation industry that can produce real art. We have the chops to have a comic industry and it can
Mm-hmm.
produce real art, but we don't because of where we are as a culture right now. But unlike, like China, which has never really done that sort of thing before, or Korea, which has never really, which has taken their culture from, which has taken their culture, at least their manga culture, kind of from the Japanese culture and has aped it in a lot of ways. Unlike America has its own culture that we can build off of, and we're not. And that's the most disappointing part in some ways.
Mm-hmm. And it's hmm. Yeah, you're right. Completely agree. Bradford Walker says the cheating in Japan is getting out of control. There's talk about the same channels about it. Oh yeah, and I would like to say in a brave statement that there is no NTR, no Neturare on this channel. JD Cohen says, "Oh hi JD Cohen, how you doing?" Telling men to be weak and women to be assertive hasn't helped Japan much. You're absolutely right.
Yep,
Like I.
that's one of the reasons people
Mm-hmm.
wonder why, like, why can't you? Terrible. It's okay. Because I know. Like, because I know, I know what's happening, and it will always bother me. Plus, it's not
Right.
true to life either, for that matter. Which
Mm-hmm.
is the other problem. What actually happens is lots of cheating.
Yep. And it really hurts the culture. And cultures where you get art that lasts the ages. Like for a long time before I really came to terms with all this years ago, is that I hated the culture I lived in. I hated the times. I knew that if I was sent forward or backward in time, I'd be a fundamentally different person than what I am today. But we are in the times we live in, and we got to do the best we can with it. Um, and maybe that involves us eventually becoming all rich and famous authors or whatever, pulling our things together and create the greatest new anime that's ever been. Whew, what a day and what a time that'll be. What a fantastic, like little thing. Oh, well. Sadly, we're not at that time yet. And I think
Well,
that.
there is good news. The good news is I don't know what will happen in the future, and not
Mm-hmm.
all indications are bad, except in America. In America, the future's but
Yes.
in the American animation industry, though, not all indications are bad as far as I can see.
Mm-hmm. It's 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 bad for some parts of things, and it's bad for the cities. But it won't be bad forever. And let's be real, even if the grass isn't greener on the other side right now, it will change in the future. And I'm the sort of man that isn't bothered by the waves of chaos and ups and downs of life. I enjoy changing things, even though I may not like it and complain about the fact that I have to exercise so much harder. There's always so much better to do for yourself. JD Cohen says, just like a modern robot carnival. I don't understand the reference, but I love robot carnivals. Hold on, I'm going to end this on a positive note. Do you remember Paprika?
Yes. Never saw it though, but I know it. It's
Oh,
famous.
you should see it. You should absolutely see it. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. And honestly,
Maybe, but wasn't it the guy who did Perfect Blue?
yeah, Satoshi
But
Kon.
yeah, thank you, Satoshi Kon. Because I did not like Perfect Blue very much.
Hmm.
I wasn't impressed with it.
Ooh, I do like Robot Carnival. Like, apparently there is a movie called Robot Carnival. I gotta see this. I'm excited. Hold on a second, but I still gotta find the scene from Paprika. Um, maybe it's Robot Parade Paprika.
I did watch though Perfect Blue, and honestly, my issue with it was I understood so little of the rules of what was happening. I had no idea what was and wasn't a real threat, and that actually removed the stakes for me. And I get that was supposed to be the horror of it or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that you're going insane or something, but it didn't work for me.
Honestly,
It backfired.
I don't consider Perfect Blue to be one of his best. I think Paprika is his best. And I believe that ultimately he should be judged on Paprika rather than Perfect Blue, which I've heard some disagreements from some horror writers. Uh, but the thing, what it does well is it does the disorientation well. Like, for me anyway, it worked, but we're also different mindsets. Like, one of the reasons we work pretty well is that even though we have like that 90% like agreement rate, it's at 10%, but also we agree about the same things in completely different ways. We have argued about the same thing several times. Uh, in our
Yes,
more religious moments.
I well, I noticed for a while before I said I was going to or I shouldn't say I said before I asked if I could join the show as a co-host. I said honestly, we really should be working together because we disagree on just enough for it to be interesting, but agree on enough that we won't be like at each other's throats all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw there was potential there.
Oh yes. Anyway, watch Paprika. How about that? We'll talk about Paprika next week.
Fair enough. I'll do paprika.
Fantastic. The English dub is pretty good. If anyone who's still listening would like to
That's
join
pretty
us
cool,
in
man.
that, I think that would make for an interesting chat. All right, guys. Thank you for
Yes.
joining us as always, and I'll see you next week. We'll see you next week. There we go, partner.